I would like to begin by acknowledging that I am situated on the traditional territory of the neutral Anishinaabeg and Haudenosaunee people. This ceded land is covered by the Haldeman Tract, land granted to the Haudenosaunees of the Six Nations of the Grand River after their contribution to the British during the American Revolutionary War. The Haldeman Tract runs 6 miles on both sides of the Grand River, and this river runs through what is now known as Waterloo, Ontario. This land is also covered by the Haldeman Treaty, which is what granted the Haldeman Tract to the Haudenosaunee, as well as the Between the Lakes Treaty from 1792 and the Simcoe Patent Treaty from 1793. Between the Lakes Treaty is one of the treaties negotiated between 1781 and 1820 by the Mississaugas of the Credit, and the Simcoe Patent Treaty covers approximately 675,000 acres of land allocated in the Haldeman Treaty itself. Currently, the closest Indigenous community to this land that we're inhabiting is the Six Nations of the Grand River, and we offer them our full respect. The host today is that during the live session, we can respect the lands in which we inhabit, and we are able to learn and grow so we can take further steps towards our path in reconciliation. As we gather today on these treaty lands, we are called in solidarity with our Indigenous brothers and sisters to thank and respect their stewardship for this sacred land. Thank you.
Watching everyone, thank you for joining us. My name is Sabrina Achkanev, and I am the Education Programs Assistant at the Gord Downie and Cheney Wajak Fund. Inspired by Cheney's story and Gord's call to build a better Canada, the Downie Wajak Fund aims to build cultural understanding and create a path towards reconciliation between Indigenous and non-Indigenous peoples. It's great to be here for this special DWF Live with Jaylin Teriak. Jaylin is a writer with an academic background in law, Indigenous studies, and human rights based in Ottawa, Ontario. She's a Nook on her maternal side and grew up in Nain, Nunatsiavut with her grandparents until moving to Toronto when she was 9 years old. There, she lived and was raised by her family, who is of Afro-Guyanese descent. Her work is embedded in her unique experience as a Nook Guyanese woman who has lived in and outside of Inuit Nunagat and has had to navigate her way through these dynamics. Today, we will talk to Jaylin about the intersectionality of the Inuit experience and the Afro-Nook representation in the arts. So Jaylin, welcome, and miigwech for joining us today.
Hey Sabrina, thanks so much for having me. Really excited to talk a little bit about my experience and to chat with you today.
Yeah, for sure. So first, can you tell us more about your community and how your upbringing has inspired your career?
So I was actually raised in Nain Nunatsiavut. For those of you who don't know where that is, it's the most northernly community in Labrador. It's part of, it's called Nain Nunatsiavut. It's part of the of Inuit Nunangat. It's the most easternly region. There's 4 regions within Inuit Nunangat. So yeah, my community is located in the most eastern point. So I was raised in Nain by my grandparents in a very small, tight-knit community where I think being raised in that community, came with so much pride, and I felt like such a deep sense of belonging. And I love growing up in Nain, and I think I was generally a really happy kid. I got to spend a lot of time with my Anansiak, my grandmother, and my Adatsiak, my grandfather, which is really important because they embedded within me like my Inuit values. So I think being raised by them, being part of my community, and also being able to live on like my land and having connection to land really instilled like we call it Inuit Kaimattiranagi values within me. Unfortunately, my early years were disrupted when I was placed in foster care in a more southerly community within Labrador. Unfortunately, I was part of a huge statistic of children who grow up in foster care in Labrador. And eventually, I was adopted to a family in Toronto, and I ended up moving south with my Afro-Guyanese family. And I think that shift, like being moved from my home and cultural environment, it deeply shaped my identity and also my academic path. It kind of fueled my desire to understand displacement more, colonization, and the ways like Indigenous people, specifically Inuit, navigate identity and belonging in urban centers. I also think it's really important to kind of talk about, because I think I belong to 2 communities. So I obviously grew up in Nain in my early years, but I was actually raised in Ottawa, and that comes with a whole other story. So my Anansiak, which is my grandmother, she moved to Ottawa in the 80s and the 90s. And that was a huge movement for Inuit at that time politically. There was a lot going on, and she actually came to Ottawa to go to Carleton, which is ironic because that's where I went. to study journalism, but she started working on the Royal Commission on Aboriginal People, which is like RCAP. That was a huge document. It was like one of the biggest documents that kind of it encompassed like all the issues. The first document that encompassed all the issues that Indigenous people were experiencing at that time. So she came here to work on that. So she's part of kind of this larger community of Inuit who are now elders who came to Ottawa to, fight for Inuit rights politically. And so she brought my mom here. So I was actually born here, and a lot of Inuit my age were born here. And so it kind of created this like urban Inuit identity and community that I actually didn't really understand that I was part of until I was about 16, 17 years old, and I was deciding, okay, I want to go to university. Where do I want to go? And so I decided I want to go to Carleton, specifically because there's such a large Inuit urban population here. And I knew that coming back here, I would be able to kind of reconnect with my community. And so when I came back here for my undergraduate degree, I didn't even realize like how many people had known me as a baby or how many people my grandmother knew. And so it was kind of like this larger grounding for me when I was doing my undergraduate degree. And I think that inspired my academic career even more, because I was realizing like not only was Nain a huge part of like my upbringing and my career path, but this urban Indigenous and urban Inuit community was also part of like my academic path.
There's a lot of parallels or a lot of overlap throughout that. So how does your experience as an Afro-Anak person challenge conventional understandings of both Blackness and indigeneity in Canada?
Yeah, I think this is a really good question. I think that I call it being Afro-Inuk. That's kind of like a term that I kind of coined, I guess, for myself. But I think being Afro-Inuk kind of means navigating two racial and cultural identities, and they're often treated as being very separate and very distinct. And even though like Black and Indigenous histories in Canada, they're very deeply intertwined, there's kind of this assumption that indigeneity is like exclusively tied to land and where you're from, and that Blackness is like inherently diasporic. And so I guess the question is like, where do people like me fit in? And that's something that I feel like I've kind of had to grapple with. And, there's this idea that in order to be quote unquote authentically Inuk, you have to fit a certain image or a certain experience. But indigeneity isn't static, and it evolves, and people look different, and people exist differently. And mixed race Inuit, urban Inuit, and Inuit have been displaced no matter what, or how disconnected, quote unquote, from land we're still Inuk. And I think that there's like this misconception about who Inuit are in Canada, and it's tied to so many stereotypes about who Inuit are as well. People kind of have this image in their head, and it's stuck in their head, and they think that Inuit don't exist in modern times, or that we only exist like, up north. I swear I get a question all the time, probably 5 times a week. It's like, what's your background? And it can get really frustrating because it comes with a plethora of other questions that just are really silly, like, oh, how did your parents meet? Or how is this even possible? And it makes me laugh, because I really do think that people think that, Inuit are so isolated that we just like don't have any contact with the outside world. And like navigating around those stereotypes can be frustrating. And then similarly, Blackness is often framed through like, like this North American, like Caribbean lens, and people don't think about the intersectionalities of Blackness. Like one thing that I'm studying in my thesis, well, I hopefully will be studying my thesis next semester, is Black whalers who came to Inuit Nunangat, so Inuit homelands, a long time ago, and they and there's like photos and stories of like Black and Inuit ancestors that existed a while ago, but people don't talk about these kinds of things. And I think that a lot of Black Indigenous histories have kind of been overlooked, and Black Indigenous people within history have been overlooked. So I think that like my existence kind of challenges these very narrow categories. And I guess my work that I'm trying to do, I kind of want to expand how we understand Blackness and indigeneity within Canada, and how Black and Inuk, or Black and Indigenous people, are represented. I know for me growing up, I was always very, very proud to be Inuk, and I always knew, I think like growing up in Maine, I always knew I was Black, but there wasn't much representation like around. Honestly, I didn't even, like, this sounds so silly, but as a kid, I didn't even know that Black and Indigenous people existed really. And that can be a very isolating experience when you're trying to navigate that by yourself and as a child, and when you don't see yourself represented in anything. So one thing I really want to do is I want to make Black and Indigenous people visible. I want to show like young kids that, that you can be proud of being Black, you can be proud of being Indigenous, that your identities can exist at the same time. And yes, while they're very separate and they're very distinct, or I would say they're very distinct, it exists in that, so the kids aren't feeling, or a lot of youth don't feel isolated in their experience, whether they're living in an urban center or living in their community.
For sure. So in the process of cultural reclamation, what challenges have you encountered, or what has surprised you about that process?
That's a really good question. I think that one of the biggest challenges has probably been dealing with imposter syndrome. I think that sometimes I say that I deal with this on like a double level a little bit. Like I ask myself questions a lot, if I'm Inuk enough, because yes, I grew up in my community until I was 9, but I left. Right. And so there was a lot of cultural loss. There was a lot of like language loss that kind of came with that. So I think like imposter syndrome is a huge thing I deal with in every single space that I'm in. I also recognize that when, that when I walk into a room, most people are not looking at me thinking like, okay, she's Inuk. And so I get a lot of questions. And I think that can evoke a lot of internal questions within myself. Like, hey, do I belong here? Do I stick out like a sore thumb? I think naturally I also have people are just very interested in, they have a lot of questions. So sometimes that can become very tiresome as well. And it also doesn't help that I'm not a fluent Inuktitut speaker. I think when I was younger, because I grew up with my grandparents, like I could understand, they spoke Inuktitut around me all the time. So I could understand, like conversationally, I could pick it up. But when you're away for such a long time, it starts to leave you. And language is so important. And so yeah, that kind of, that can be kind of frustrating, my language loss. I think sometimes it's funny, like if I'm on a bus and I hear Inuit speaking Inuktitut, and I could hear them answer, like asking questions, and I reply to them. They're really kind of surprised, and then they ask me like, "Are you Inuk?" And I say, "Yeah." So that's something that happens a lot. But I think reclaiming identity as an adult means recognizing kind of what was taken from you, but also kind of resisting the urge to prove myself to people as well. But I think what surprised me, and I was thinking about this not too long ago. I think what surprised me is how much how much memory lives in the body, if that makes sense. Like certain foods, smells, and even like weather patterns, they kind of evoke like very deep emotional responses that are tied to home or tied to memories that I have living with my grandparents, especially when spring comes around. When spring comes around in Ottawa, I feel like I can just remember kind of being back home. I also think that reclamation, while being Inuk, looks so different in the city. Inuit, we're a very distinct group, and we have our own ways of identifying each other, right? And I think that sometimes our own conversations as community can get lost in dialogues about identity within like First Nations community. Because those two things look very different. And so I've had to kind of navigate that, like being in spaces that, because Inuit, we're a smaller population as compared to, First Nations folks. So when I step into to spaces that are just indigenous spaces generally, I do get questions that I wouldn't necessarily get if I was in like a Inuk space in Ottawa, because people know me. It's a bit easier. So I've had to navigate that, and that has been pretty difficult at times. But I don't know if this surprises me necessarily, but Inuit have also been so loving and accepting, like through the process of coming back to Ottawa and trying to get a better sense of like, who I was, or who I am. I think that living in my community, going to Toronto after, growing up in Inuk and then going to Toronto, I got like a very deep sense of shame because people didn't like, it's not like how it is now. People did not know who Inuit were. So when I had first come to the school, everybody being in Toronto, everybody was like, oh, she's just a mixed kid. She's a mixed kid. But people didn't understand who I really was. And there was no cultural supports there for me. And so it evoked a lot of shame. Like at one point I felt like embarrassed. People made me feel embarrassed to be Inuk. So coming back to Ottawa, Inuit here were just very accepting a lot of the times and like kind of embraced me. It surprised me, but it didn't, because I think that that's usually just like how Inuit are.
That's beautiful. So picking up on what you said earlier, what foods bring up like those memories of Nain and your connection to land, or
Well,
in the north?
Yeah. Well, we have this thing called, well, I guess the English word is country food. So we have like a plethora of different foods. So my favorite is kwak. It's like frozen, or kwak tuktu, like frozen caribou. So we have a lot of like really amazing Inuit services in Ottawa, and they provide country food. So one of those being Tungasuving Inuit. So sometimes they'll give out country food and I'll go and I'll pick it up. That's one. As soon as I come home and I have it, it's just like, it almost like you close your eyes and you can just picture yourself like back home. Another one is mattak, which is like whale blubber. And that's something that we eat back home. I wish I had like a picture of it so I could show it. But same thing. It's like even the process of cutting it up. I have like my, just like how my nonstick has it, I have like my uluit, so my knives, like knives that women carry, I have them like over my my stove, and I'll take them and I'll cut the food, and it just like connects me to my, it doesn't just connect me to my culture, but it just connects me to like my memories. Just like even the act of cutting food. Sometimes I'll get like Arctic char sent down. A lot of it I eat frozen, like frozen and raw. But it's like a taste of back home is like the best way to put it. And then you can also just inviting people over, and just the act of eating food together too. It evokes a lot of memories, like being small and being with my grandparents, my aunts cutting it up for me, and me just like, going and taking a piece. It just creates such visceral memories for me.
Yeah. And that, it definitely brings up, it just reminds me of home, like back home, because I'm from a remote community. So
yeah,
sharing food is always just a beautiful thing. So given the colonial histories that continue to impact both Inuit and Black communities, how do you think the arts can serve as a platform for resistance and decolonization? Are there any specific art movements or works that you find particularly empowering?
So I actually didn't really come into I've always appreciated art, but I don't really think I came into the arts, and I didn't realize what like a powerful platform it was until like 2020. But I think generally the arts kind of serves as like a powerful platform for resistance and decolonization, because it allows Inuit and Black communities to kind of reclaim our own narratives, like challenge colonial representations, and we can start to like envision futures beyond oppression. I think like I hate that this story is often, and that's one of the reasons I didn't come into this conversation, to just talk about the bad things that have happened in my life, because there's so much to our communities beyond oppression. There's so much to our communities beyond kind of colonization. And but I do think that colonial histories have erased and misrepresented or commodified our cultures. So through like artistic expression, we can like disrupt these narratives and assert our own agency. So it's a space for agency. It's a space for reclamation. It's a powerful space. I don't think a lot of people realize what a powerful platform it can be. I also think it's kind of an amazing space for Inuit and Black communities to come together and to have really important conversations, and to create really beautiful things. And I think that we can have powerful and productive conversations, because unfortunately through colonization, I think there's been a lot of been a lot of disruption in the relationships between Indigenous and Black folks. And there's anti-Black racism that exists within Indigenous communities, and there's anti-Indigenous racism that exists within Black communities. And so I think through art, we can start to unpack some of those things and have some of those important conversations. So I said I didn't really come into the arts until 2020. And it's actually a funny story of how that came to be. I was in a university course, and I was at Carleton getting my undergrad in law and Indigenous studies. And through my course, we had to go to the Carleton University Art Gallery. This is back in in 2020 again. And I walked in, and we got to walk through this exhibit called "They Forgot We Are Seeds" by Cozy Nibe. And basically it was, it reimagined the history of Canada as a settler colonial state, and Black Indigenous women were kind of at the center of an effort to kind of counter some of those settler colonial narratives. And I saw this picture, and it just I couldn't stop staring at it. It was this photo of you could see Black and Indigenous women. They were sharing food, and in one of the photos there was a girl lighting a kulik, which is this traditional Inuit lamp, and then right next to it was this bottle, and it said sorrel on it. So sorrel is this drink that a lot of Caribbean or West Indian people have during the holidays. So it was actually the first time in art I saw both of my identities represented in one photo. It was really nice to see. And that photo was by Catherine Takpani. And so from there, I mentioned something in class, and it kind of unfolded. I got to write a article for Inuit Art Quarterly about what that experience was like for me, seeing both my identities represented in this kind of art. And so it opened up a conversation, right? It opened up a conversation about the intersectionalities of my identities. And it was an amazing thing to be part of. I wrote the article when I was pregnant with my son, so it was also very healing at the same time. And I think I still have conversations about that, and I still get people kind of reaching out to me about that. I had some people talk about, this one lady messaged me and say, oh, I live in a remote reserve, and my daughter is First Nations and Black, and I was just so happy to see this article, because she doesn't have much representation out there. So it's telling our stories and being able to tell our stories. I got to tell my story through the platform of art, right? That art piece provided me the platform to be able to do that. So I thought that was really amazing. And it kind of goes back to, I think the second part of the question was, are there any specific art movements? And I think Inuit futurism is or even any kind of Black futurism, that kind of art where, Inuit, which kind of reimagines Inuit thriving in the future rather than kind of been stuck to narratives of trauma. I think it's just really empowering. And, it asserts that we're not just relics of the past. We don't have this very fixated identity, but that, we look different, and that we're active agents in shaping our own identities. And there's a lot of artists out there that I like. I don't really think I have any specific ones. I have some art in my house by a friend of mine. She also did my tattoos. Her name is Malaya. She's really amazing. She makes some really amazing art. She does line art, which I really appreciate. She's Aiden Corey makes really amazing art. They're really talented. In terms of music, Elisippi. I love Elisippi's music. Filmmakers, Alethea Arnold-Brill. She's awesome. So yeah, there's so many people. I could go on, but those are just the first ones that come to mind. Yeah.
Awesome. So, what would you like to see change in the way Afro-Neck people are represented during Black History Month in both cultural programming and public discussions?
I find this is a tricky question. I I think I have a little bit of an issue with Black History Month because for me, Black History is every day. But I think that I would like to maybe see more discussions. I don't know if I necessarily, because I think that I'm like, people see me and they automatically like, okay, like she's Black presenting. So I don't necessarily have issues with my representation in Black History Month. I see myself in Black History Month, but maybe just having more conversations about, or Black History Month being a space to have more conversations about like the intersectionality between Inuit or even just Indigenous in general and Black identities and what that looks like. I think that it could be an amazing opportunity for Indigenous and Black folks to come together and have those conversations, and kind of echoing what I said before, unpacking some like, you know, narratives that exist or contentions that exist in both our communities. I think that, yeah, it could just be a platform for really productive conversations.
For sure. So with that, I just want to thank you. Thank you, Jalen, and to all those who tuned in today. You can head over to downeywenjack.ca/DWF Live for a list of our upcoming sessions and to look back at past sessions too. So miigwech, and have a great day.